I stood at my son's doorstep, with nothing but 3 worn bags and a heart that still hadn't stopped racing from the storm. I had lost everything: the house I had lived in for decades, the garden I had tended with my own hands, the place where memories of my late husband still lingered. I thought at least here, at my son's home, I would find comfort. Instead, I was met with words that cut deeper than the tornado ever could. His smile was distant, his voice cold, and beside him his girlfriend's eyes scanned my bags like they were stains on her perfect floor. In that moment, I felt the door close, not just to the house, but to my place in his life. I tried to steady myself, to remind him this was only temporary, that I just needed a corner until I found my footing again. But the message was clear: I was not welcome. Privacy, space, convenience, those mattered more than the woman who had carried him into this world. I walked away from his polished home feeling smaller than I had in years. The storm inside me heavier than the one that had ripped my house apart. At 67, I never thought I'd find myself homeless, turned away by my only child. I sat in a borrowed car, parked under the harsh glow of a grocery store light, clutching my late husband's old toolbox like it could anchor me. I told myself not to cry, but the tears came anyway, silent, bitter, unstoppable. That night, I realized this story wasn't only about the loss of a house. It was about something far greater: the loss of belonging, the betrayal of family. And yet, I couldn't know then that this painful rejection would open a door I thought had been closed forever. My name is Margaret Turner, and for most of my 67 years, my world was built on simple routines and the walls of a modest house in Kansas. That house was never just wood and brick. It was the vessel of my life, carrying within it the echoes of laughter, arguments, love, and loss. When I think of my husband Harold, I see him out back in the workshop, tinkering with his tools, humming under his breath. He's been gone 8 years now, but his presence lingered in every corner of that home, the old sweater still hanging by the basement door, the faint smell of his aftershave clinging to the dresser drawers. Sometimes I'd sit in his chair on the porch in the evenings, just to feel a little closer to him. My son Eric was my only child, my pride and my heart. The dining room walls still held his childhood photographs, his first day of school, the science fair project we stayed up all night finishing, the awkward teenage grin with braces. Life moved him 45 minutes away to the city, where his days were full of deadlines, polished houses, and people who seemed to live in a different world than mine. Our conversations had grown shorter, our visits less frequent. Still, I carried the hope that he knew this home would always be his as much as mine. Day to day, my life was quiet, predictable. I tended to my rose garden every morning, kneeling in the damp soil, listening to the sparrows chatter in the hedges. The kitchen, though silent now, once rang with the clatter of family dinners. I still brewed tea every afternoon at 2:30, just as Harold liked it, even if I drank it alone. The walls held my solitude, but also my history. They were my anchor, keeping me steady in a world that had grown emptier with each passing year. And yet, sometimes, I felt the stillness too sharply. There was a fragility to it, like holding on to glass that could shatter at the slightest touch. I didn't know then that the storm already brewing on the horizon would take more than walls and windows. It would strip away everything I thought I could rely on. It started like any other spring afternoon. I was in the kitchen brewing tea, the same small ritual I'd kept since Harold passed. But the light outside shifted. The sky turned a color I had never seen before, an eerie green mixed with black. It felt heavy, pressing down on the house itself. My stomach knotted. I had lived through storms all my life in Kansas, but this one felt different. Then came the sirens. That wailing sound sliced through the air and straight into my bones. My radio confirmed the unthinkable. A tornado was on the ground, moving directly toward my neighborhood. 10 minutes, maybe less. That was all the time I had to decide what mattered most from a lifetime. My hands shook as I grabbed an old suitcase. I didn't pack clothes. I packed memories. My wedding photo with Harold, Eric's baby pictures, my mother's pearl necklace, a few important papers. That was it. 43 years of living reduced to what I could fit in one bag. I pulled Harold's old sweater off the back of his chair and clutched it to my chest. The basement was dark, colder than usual. I crouched in the corner, my breath loud in my ears. The sound that followed is one I'll never forget. It wasn't just wind, it was like a freight train tearing through the world above me. Wood cracked, metal screamed, glass shattered. The floor trembled as if the earth itself was angry. I pressed my face into Harold's sweater, whispering his name, praying the house would hold. And then, silence. A silence so complete it made my ears ring. My legs felt like water as I climbed the basement steps. I opened the door, and where my living room had been, there was nothing but sky. The roof was gone. The walls ripped apart. My rose garden was shredded. The petals scattered like confetti in the mud. The kitchen table where Eric once did his homework was jammed halfway into the garage wall. I walked through the wreckage in a daze. Splintered beams, broken glass, pieces of a life that no longer existed. The house Harold had been so proud of was gone in a matter of minutes. I had no home, no safe place, just a suitcase, 3 garbage bags of clothes, and Harold's toolbox that somehow survived beneath the rubble. That night, as I sat in a borrowed car with my belongings piled beside me, the weight of it all came crashing down. I was 67 years old, widowed, and suddenly homeless. My only hope was the son I had given everything for. I told myself he would open his door. That family meant something stronger than storms. I didn't know then that the real storm was still ahead of me, the storm inside my own family. I drove toward Eric's neighborhood, with my heart pounding harder than the storm had days earlier. The suitcase sat in the back seat, the same one I had packed in a panic as the tornado closed in. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they hurt. But I told myself this was the one safe place left for me. My son's home. My family. When I turned into a street, I felt like I was stepping into another world. Neatly trimmed lawns, fresh paint, cars gleaming in driveways. His house stood proud, 2 stories high with a polished porch swing and flowers that looked like they had been arranged for a magazine. I caught sight of Sophie's shiny SUV parked neatly by the curb. Everything about their life screamed stability and comfort, the very things I had just lost. I rang the bell with my chest tight, rehearsing words of gratitude in my mind. I imagined warmth, maybe even a hug. Maybe Sophie offering me tea while Eric carried in my bags. I wanted to believe they would see me, broken and fragile, and instinctively draw me in. But instead, what I saw in their eyes wasn't welcome, it was calculation. Sophie's smile was polite, almost rehearsed, and Eric's face looked strained, like he was bracing himself. Their home smelled of candles and fresh paint, yet I felt like an intruder the moment I stepped inside. My suitcase seemed to stain the clean perfection of their living room. They spoke about routines, about how the house was small despite its size, about the importance of privacy. They said it softly, wrapped in careful words, but the meaning cut through me like glass. There was no room for me here, not in their home, not in their lives. I stood there, nodding, pretending I understood, as if I agreed with the idea that a mother with nowhere else to go could be a disruption. Inside, though, my chest burned. I thought of the nights I stayed awake rocking Eric through fevers, the double shifts Harold and I worked to pay for his college, the sacrifices that had defined my life. I wanted to scream, but no sound came, just silence. When I finally stepped out of their house, the evening air felt colder than it had all day. Eric closed the door gently behind me, but to me, it sounded like a slam. I carried my suitcase back to the car and slid into the driver's seat. The house glowed behind me, warm and alive, while I sat in the dark, swallowed by the emptiness of my own reflection in the windshield. That night, I parked in a grocery store lot, the engine off, the air heavy, my suitcase on the seat beside me, like a reminder of everything I had lost. I pulled Harold's sweater over me, trying to find comfort in its fading smell. Shame and despair pressed down harder than the storm ever had. I closed my eyes and whispered a question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. How had I become a stranger in my own family? I didn't know it yet, but those nights in the car would break me open in ways I never expected. They would also lead me to a voice from my past I thought I'd lost forever. The nights in that parking lot blurred together, each one colder than the last. I tried to sleep in the driver's seat, pulling Harold's old sweater tight around me, but the silence of the lot pressed down like a weight. My body ached, but what hurt most was the shame, the thought that I had become invisible, someone who no longer had a place in her own family's world. One night, as I rummaged through my suitcase for warmth, a small slip of paper fluttered out from a side pocket. It was yellowed, creased, the ink fading after half a century. James Whitmore, his name, his number, and the words, "Call me anytime." He had written that when we were barely 18, after one of those summer nights we thought would last forever. I had kept it tucked away all these years, more out of sentiment than purpose. I stared at it, my heart pounding. What would he think of me now, wrinkled, weary? Broken pride told me to put it back. That calling would only expose how far I had fallen. But desperation has a way of drowning out pride. My hands shook as I held my phone, hovering over the numbers, battling with myself. I was terrified of being rejected again. When I finally pressed call, my voice cracked as I left a message. I didn't even know if the number still belonged to him. I sat in silence afterward, the weight of my decision hanging in the air, convinced I had made a fool of myself. But then, headlights cut across the lot. My heart stopped as I saw him step out of his car. Older, but unmistakably James. His eyes searched for me, and when they found me, they softened in a way I hadn't felt in years. He didn't see a homeless old woman, he saw me, the girl he once loved. He reached out, and in his presence, my shame melted just a little. He told me I was still beautiful, even in this broken state. For the first time since the tornado, I felt something shift. In the warmth of his gaze, I wasn't abandoned or unwanted. I was seen. I was worthy of care. Sitting there, beneath the harsh glow of the parking lot lights. I realized this meeting wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one I hadn't dared to imagine. And for the first time in weeks, hope stirred quietly inside me. Life with James felt like slipping into a warm embrace I didn't realize I had been missing. His home wasn't just a roof over my head, it was a place where I felt human again. We shared quiet mornings over coffee, afternoons tending to the garden, and evenings filled with stories that made me laugh until I forgot how much I had lost. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I felt wanted. That's when Eric started calling. At first, I told myself it was guilt tugging at him, maybe even love. But the questions came too quickly about James, about his house, about what he did for a living. There was a tone in his voice I couldn't ignore, a sharp edge of curiosity wrapped in a thin layer of concern. Soon, Sophie began sending little packages, boxes of wine, glossy fruit baskets, a silk scarf folded so carefully it felt more like a business gesture than a gift of love. Each time I opened one, I wondered if she imagined I would take a picture with it and send it back as proof I was still part of their world. But I knew better. These weren't gifts for me. They were tokens of interest in the life I was now living with James. James never questioned any of it. He treated me with the same patience and kindness he always had, as if my worth was never tied to what I could give him or what I cost. When he held my hand at night, I felt dignity return, piece by piece. The more Eric reached out, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't about love. It was about what James represented: stability, wealth, influence. And for the first time, I let myself see it plainly. The attention that once would have thrilled me now only left a bitter taste. As I sat in the quiet of James's living room, surrounded by the comfort of someone who asked for nothing in return, I realized the truth. My son hadn't suddenly found space in his heart for me. He had found space for what he thought he could gain. That knowledge settled heavy on my chest, but beneath it was something steadier, something stronger. I was no longer at his mercy, and I knew, sooner or later, this truth would have to be spoken aloud. The moment was coming, and I could feel it pressing closer with every call, every false gesture. The table was set in quiet elegance, the kind of dinner that should have been filled with small talk and easy laughter. James carved the roast with his steady hands, and I tried to keep my heart calm, though I knew Eric's presence was like a shadow across the room. At first, the conversation floated lightly: work, the weather, Sophie's new projects, but beneath every word was a current I could feel building. It was James who broke the surface. His voice was calm, measured, but each word carried weight. He spoke of dignity, of loyalty, of the kind of love that doesn't vanish when life turns hard. He didn't raise his voice, but the firmness in his tone cut sharper than anger ever could. Eric shifted in his seat, his excuses spilling out in a tangle. He spoke of timing, of space, of how complicated things had been. But nothing could soften the truth hanging in the air, that when I had stood on his doorstep broken and desperate, he had turned me away. Now, here he was, seated at James's table, reaching only when comfort and stability surrounded me again. I sat in silence, my chest heavy and light all at once. For years, I had carried the weight of rejection quietly, swallowing my hurt so it wouldn't break me. But in that moment, James carried it for me. He spoke what I never had the strength to say. The room fell into silence when he finished. Eric's eyes lowered. Sophie's hands folded tightly in her lap. And me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen, defended, worthy. The silence stretched, not empty but full, and I knew this night was a turning point. Something had shifted, and the path ahead was already taking shape. Life with James felt like a slow return to color after years of gray. His home was steady, warm, filled with laughter that didn't feel forced. For the first time in a long while, I didn't wake up weighed down by fear of what would come next. Instead, I woke to fresh coffee, the sound of birds in the yard, and the comfort of knowing I was not alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in golden light, James reached for my hand. He didn't need grand gestures or rehearsed words. His eyes carried the truth he wanted me beside him. Not out of pity, but out of love. When he asked me to marry him, my breath caught. My heart ached in the best way, as if all the broken pieces I had carried were being carefully placed back together. I said yes with tears in my eyes, not from sorrow, but from relief that I was still worthy of being chosen, cherished, and loved. In that moment, I thought of Eric. Once, his rejection had felt like the end of me, but now, I saw it differently. His refusal had pushed me toward a truth I had long ignored, that my worth was not defined by anyone else's approval. Pain had led me here, to a love that honored me, to a life where I was seen as more than a burden. Looking back, I realized resilience is not about never falling. It's about standing again, even when your legs shake. True love, whether from family or someone who returns after 50 years, is not measured by words, but by who shows up when the storms hit hardest. So here I stand, not broken, but rebuilt, ready for this new chapter with James. And if my story touched you, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment, pass it on, remind someone that dignity and love are worth holding out for. Because sometimes, the ending you never expected becomes the beginning you always needed. I stood frozen in front of what used to be my home, but now was nothing more than a splintered heap of wood, brick, and shattered glass. The smell of damp earth and broken plaster filled the air, mingling with the metallic taste of dust that still clung to my mouth. The sky, eerily calm after unleashing its fury, stretched above me like nothing had happened at all. Yet beneath my feet lay the remains of nearly 7 decades of my life. In my hands, I clutched the one thing the storm hadn't stolen: a faded photograph of my family. My late husband's steady smile, my younger son's carefree grin, the faces that once made this house feel alive. The edges of the picture were worn, the surface smudged with my tears, but it was all I had left. Everything else, the walls that echoed with laughter, the kitchen that smelled of Sunday dinners, the garden Harold and I planted together, gone in a matter of minutes. I kept replaying the sound of it, the roar like a freight train tearing through my world, the walls groaning, the roof ripping away, my own screams swallowed by the wind, and then silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier than the storm itself. Standing there, surrounded by rubble, I couldn't make sense of it. How does a life built over decades vanish in one violent breath of nature? How do you start again when even the ground beneath you feels unsteady? I pressed the photograph to my chest, holding it like it might anchor me against the emptiness. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood in the ruins, letting the stillness wrap around me, knowing the story of how I came to this point, needed to be told, starting long before the storm ever arrived.